standing over in the corner because I have a bad back and I need a wall to lean against. But again, we really appreciate everyone coming here. We really appreciate everyone showing up in this conversation. I want to get this started by giving an opportunity to go around the room and introduce. Going to get it started by giving everyone an opportunity to go around the room and introduce themselves as part of either the HOA or the MUD. My name is Chester Pleasant. I am the president of the HOA, and I am also a director and vice president of MUD 1.
How do you become two?
Beg pardon?
We'll get.
Yeah, my name is Jack McClure, and I'm here representing MUD 1. I'm the president of the MUD district, and thank you for coming tonight.
Good evening, I'm Steve Robinson with Allen Boone Humphreys Robinson. We represent Cinco Southwest MUD number 1.
I'm Sanjay Bapat, also with ABHR.
My name is John Cole. I'm secretary of MUD 2.
Kimberly Howard, CIA Services.
I said MUD 2, I'm sorry, Cinco 2.
Hi, I'm Whitney Smith. I'm HOA Director and also MUD 2 Director.
Hi, my name is Surinder Singhal. I'm HOA Director and Secretary.
Keith Lakeman, I'm Director of the HOA, Assistant Treasurer.
Rich McClarty, I'm Vice President of the HOA Board.
Ray Dreyer, Director, HOA Board.
Hi, I'm Laura Tate. I'm the General Manager for the Homeowners Association. Roxanne Bailey with CIA Services.
Good, thanks. I know there are also some other MUD directors in the audience. If you would mind standing up and identifying yourself. Okay, let's try to keep it down. Again, thank everyone for coming. We're here tonight to have a conversation about the information that's been disseminated. This information has been in the Cinco Ranch newsletter, it's been on postcard mailers, it's also been on social media. We're not here tonight to address all this stuff on social media. We're here to attempt to deliver the facts as we know them to you, the homeowners and the residents of Cinco. Want to let you know right now from the very beginning, this is a HOA issue, this is not a MUD issue. The MUD has came to the assistance of the HOA once we discovered that we was going to have this issue. And so as an HOA, we have to determine the solution. The MUD is only here to assist. The MUD is not driving the decisions. The MUD is not driving the process. The MUD is here to assist us in finding a solution along with the residents. There has been no final decision made as to what we're going to do. This process is a process that we're going to endeavor upon with the assistance of the residents. This is a process that we're going to endeavor on with the assistance of the MUD. And if the HOA decides that they want to go this alone, the HOA would do so. Again, this is an HOA issue, it is not a MUD issue. Everyone has seen the price tag. The price tag of 25 to 27 million for this project. Tonight we're going to explain to you how we got to those numbers. This is not a final decision that this is the process that we're going to use, but this is the solution that we're going to come to. There are still several questions to be answered and addressed. Tonight is about listening to your concerns, providing answers to your questions, and soliciting your input. And at the end of the session, we will talk about next steps. And so, if we can put up the first set of slides. Again, this is, and I will repeat this throughout the night, this is an HOA issue, it is not the MUD issue. The MUD is not clamoring to come to our aid and take this process on. We went to the MUD and asked the MUD for assistance in taking on this issue. The project is in the developmental exploratory stage. No final decision has been made. The cost estimates are based upon projections. I know there's been a lot of conversation around the 25, 27 million. The process hasn't been bidded, the job has not been bidded. But we had to have some numbers to go to the MUD with around, okay, if we're gonna take on this project, what those numbers would look like. Residents' involvement. There will be and we've had this conversation, there will be an advisory board put together of residents. A lot of residents here tonight. You'll have an opportunity to serve on that advisory board if you choose to. That advisory board will work with the HOA to find solutions, and that advisory board would have an opportunity to get more in-depth information around the project. Next slide. One of the questions been asked is the chronology of when residents took over the HOA. From 2000 to 2009, 2010, there was a 5-member board. There's 4 developers and 1 resident. That 1 resident was me. In 2012, there were 6 board members, 4 developers and 2 residents. I was one of those residents. Don't recall the name of the other. 2012, 2014, there was a 7-member board. There was a 7-member board. There was 5 developers and 2 residents. When I say 5 developers, meaning that the developer held those positions and people that worked for the developer were in those positions. In 2015 until present, we have a 7-member board. All 7 residents were elected by delegates or appointed to complete unfulfilled terms. And during that time, between 2015 and 2019, we began funding the replacement fund. This slide says it was 162 million spent on fencing to date. That number is actually 205, not 162 million, I'm sorry. 162,000, that number is actually 205,000. That's fencing that has failed down or been in need of repair. That includes both brick and iron fencing. In 2015, the board we began a review of various fences, especially iron fencing at the time, since that was our major issue. We began a program to repair and maintain those fences. In 2017, the board began to review brick fencing because we had some issue with brick fencing. And when we started that issue, we began to understand the issue even better. And part of the issue was, and you'll find out in this presentation, is that when we lost a pound in a stretch of fencing, we could not find a replacement brick of the same color, nature, and design of the bricks that were damaged. And so we began to understand that if we patch the fences one at a time, we're going to end up with a patchwork. We're going to end up with a quilt. And I don't think anyone moved into Cinco II to live in a neighborhood where some of the bricks were one color and the bricks next to those color, that pound was a different color. And so we were going to end up with this patchwork, and that's when we began to realize this is a bigger project than we anticipated. The other thing we understood was that in the budget, the way the budget was designed and built, it wasn't designed to replace fencing in a stretch. It was designed only to patch. As pounds failed, you went in and replaced it. We realized that this wasn't really a very viable solution. And that's when we began to have the conversation with the MUD around this issue. I began to try to find some assistance from the MUD in finding a solution. Next slide. That's it? Okay, 2019. Back in August, we had a meeting, community meeting such as this meeting, and about 95 people showed up. And we have continued the communication process to get more people involved. And so that's why, as a board, we're elated. We're not here, we are elated to have all of you in the room tonight. Because the answer to the problem is in the residents. It's not the board, it's not the MUD. The answer to the issue is in the residents. And the more residents we can have involved in the process, the better off the solution will be, because there's more voices, and there's more input, and there's more diversity in the solution. We're here tonight to share with you one plan. And as we go this journey, we understand there's numerous and different ways of going about this. Myself, as the president of the MUD, as the president of the HOA, and I'm speaking here tonight as the president of the HOA. Myself, as president of the HOA, believe that the presentation tonight and the solution that's being presented tonight is a very viable solution. It's a solution that's going to enable the HOA to move forward and have this issue addressed in a very consistent and permanent manner. I'm not here to tell you that this is the only solution, but this is a solution. This is an opportunity for us to better understand it and to move forward. We're pausing, we're not stopping, but this has always been the process. This has always been the objective. It's always been the objective of getting the residents involved in this process. If you look around, one of the things I hear consistently about Cinco Southwest, Cinco 2, I'm not going to say Cinco Southwest, Cinco 2, because the Northwest is up in the corner is also part of Cinco, is that the infrastructure we have here, the aesthetics we have here, the amenities we have here are first class. And everyone in this room moved into Cinco because of those amenities, because of those aesthetics, and because of those types of living that made Cinco a destination area here in Houston. Our crumbling infrastructure would not keep us in that position. And we're here tonight to address part of that. Part of the issue we have here is the brick wall fencing is a crumbling infrastructure. And it has to be addressed. And eventually it has to be paid for. And regardless of the path we go down, in the end, it's we, the people standing around this room, that's going to have to pay. There's been a lot of questions around the developer. We're working with the developer. We have addressed the developer issues, and we're talking to the developer about trying to have them incur some of these expenses. What that's going to look like in the end, I have no idea. But we're on that path. And so, I'm not going to have anything else further ado. The next person come to the mic is Jack McClure. I work with Jack. Jack is a resident here in Cinco, and Jack is also the president of MUD 1.
Thank you, Chester. I too, like Chester, have been a resident since '08. At that time I moved out here, I tried to immediately get onto the MUD 2 water district, which I was on until I changed over to MUD 1. We want to address your concerns tonight. We do thank you for all coming. I know it's a big issue, and it's an incredible crowd. Thanks for coming. What I'd like to do now is let our consultants go through the process that we've gone through and have them go over the questions that you might have at the end. Go ahead.
One other thing, again, this is a conversation. This is a conversation, and so there's going to be a presentation made, and we would ask for you to hold all of your questions until the end of the presentation. I have the luxury of being retired, and so I will stay here. I know I'm going to go to bed at 2 o'clock. So, and CIA laughing because they get emails from me at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I will stay here as long as need to be for you guys to get answers, for us to hear your questions and concerns. The other individuals around the table making the presentation have 9 to 5s. And so when we get to that point, we'll ask for you to be very polite. Let them make their presentation. They will answer whatever questions that you have of them before they leave. And then myself and along with other MUD members are willing to stay here and answer all of your other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chester. I'd like to introduce Sanjay and Steve.
All right. Can y'all go over to slide 3? So this just brings back, what Chester and Jack said. It's why we here. It's your neighborhood, Cinco Southwest, was constructed largely between 2006 and 2013, and along kind of the common areas, thoroughfares, roads, parks, green belts, things like that. You guys have fencing, whether it's iron fencing, brick fencing, wood fencing. Over time, with Houston's climate, sometimes inconsistent engineering, soil conditions, and then certain maintenance issues related to the fencing, portions of that fencing around the neighborhood are starting to deteriorate and starting to fail. And so because of that, today, there are critical portions of that fencing, critical segments that need to be replaced. They're already in a dangerous situation, kind of in danger of collapse. Go to the next slide. So, we don't really need this one. Chester went over this. This is in your packet, but this goes over kind of the timeline of how the HOA started to look at this. A little bit of history behind the fencing fund, a little bit of history about how much the HOA has spent on it. After assessing the problem late last year, the HOA came to the MUD boards and asked the MUD boards for assistance in tackling the fencing problem. So we go to the next one. So they came to us and said, hey, these are the potential consequences of broken fencing. It's deteriorating, unsightly, and unsafe. That may affect your property values. If it's failing, that may affect the safety of your neighbors and your pets. If a section of fence collapses, it's dangerous for the people who live along the fence. It's dangerous for the people that are in proximity when it fails. And of course, fencing is security. And so with failing fencing, that creates a problem for security. And as Chester mentioned, the appeal of Cinco Ranch, why people want to live here, is that this is a highly amenitized, well-maintained, attractive, and safe community. That is the reason why property values are higher here than other neighborhoods in the area, and broken or collapsed fencing can affect that appeal. We can go to the next one. And so once the HOA came to the MUD board, we had to develop a process for assessing the problem. We had to figure out what is going on with the fencing, what is the status of all of the fencing, and then how can we tackle the problem. So what we did was we retained a landscape architect, so that's TBG, and we have a representative, Sean Hewitt from TBG, that's going to come talk to you in a minute, and a structural engineer from BGA Engineers. Now the structural engineer specializes in the type of brick thin wall fencing that you guys have around Cinco Southwest. They have more than 2 decades of experience in designing, constructing, and supervising construction of these types of fencing. So over the course of about 3 weeks or a month, TBG, so really Sean and Mike Holbert here, went to the neighborhood and walked all 35 miles of fencing that you have. Now I had a couple of those handouts out there, and if you don't mind, let me grab what you got right there. They put together a database of every piece of fencing. Now, this is what it looks like it's normally on an Excel sheet, but this is what it looks like, right? So I'll put that down. So they put together a database of every piece of fencing, and then they presented a report. And the report goes through every section of fence in the neighborhood. It has a picture, tells you when it was built, tells you its observations, and tells you its recommendations on what to do. While they did that, they assigned a priority level of 1 through 4 to each fence. Priority 1 means major portions of it are failing. Priority 2 means significant portions of it are failing. Priority 3 means it's in pretty good shape. And priority 4 means we just need to watch it, but those fences are structurally sound. Right? So we have a report that has every section of fencing and the report of every section of fencing put together. In addition to that, for each section of fencing, they put together a cost estimate. The cost estimate based on the prevailing kind of market rates for replacement of brick fences, replacement of wood fences, and replacement of aluminum fencing. And that's something we can also send to the HOA and put up on the website, but you guys can see on a section-by-section basis how the cost estimates were developed for this. After they presented that to the MUD board, we'll get into this a little bit later, but the structure of Cinco Ranch, or municipal utility districts, is called a master district structure. So you have master districts and participant districts. Each of you live in one of the participant districts, 2, 3, or 4, that you pay your water bill to. And you have a master district that runs all of the major facilities for all of the area, right? So they run the water plant, the wastewater plant. They built the major thoroughfares and operate the parks. And so they presented it to the master district, and then the master district took those findings, put together another presentation, and I've been discussing this with the participant districts over the last 5 or 6 months. So we can move to the next slide. And so this goes over again what I just discussed. When they put together their assessment of the problem, they identified priorities 1 through 4. So you can see, you can go back one again. This details exactly what priority 1, 2, 3, or 4. Priority 1, immediate need, 2, 3 to 5 years. Priority 3, 6 to 8 years, and priority 4, 8 to 10 years, maybe longer. And so I'm going to turn this over to Sean and Mike, who are going to go over kind of their fencing or their findings. They'll tell you kind of the common failures that they found, their observations, and certain potential replacements.
Hi everyone, my name is Sean Hewitt with TBG Partners. We're the landscape architecture firm that was hired to do this assessment. So as everyone's been saying, there's about 35 miles of fencing in this area. That's close to 185,000 linear feet of fencing. So Mike and I and a team of us, we were hired to walk all 35 miles of fencing and just assess the condition of the fencing to see what is causing premature deterioration, if any, and also all the factors that could lead to that, which we'll go over later in the presentation. From there, we were able to build this database, which I think you all got a copy of. And this is cost estimate. This is the cost estimate. And then in this database, we just listed the condition of the fencing, what we thought was wrong with it, and then we assigned it a priority. Can you go back to the last slide? Then we just assigned a priority, like Sanjay just said, with priority 1 being an immediate need, and that's within the next 3 years. Priority 2, we saw some minor problems, but structural issues were starting to happen, so we think those in the next 3 to 5 years. Priority 3, the next 6 to 8 years, and priority 4, 8 to 10 years plus. So now Mike Colbert, the structural engineer, is going to come up and explain some of these problems that we found.
Can we ask the questions in between?
Not until the end. We would like all questions to be wait until the end.
Yeah, because I think if we ask the questions, it will be more relevant. We cannot wait till.
Well, we would like to wait.
If you're on the page, if you ask the questions, you know, it will be
We
more
can bring
clear.
it, we can bring it back to whatever section you need. You can go back to whatever slide. Everyone should have a copy of the presentation already. Over here, Jim. Okay, well, whenever you have a question, we'll go back to
We
the
have more
relevant slide.
questions actually, so we know all of this, we read through the pages, so I think we want to ask more questions. Yes, sir.
Okay, listen up. This isn't a perfect process, but we're gonna have to be lenient and we're gonna have to be understanding that we need to get through the process. If you have a question, make a mental note of it, and through the course of the night, when the presentation has been completed, we will answer those questions if an answer is available. And so what I ask you, and you know, we all here represent Cinco, and I think that we all understand the need to be civil. We understand that questions are in need of answers, and this is our intent to answer those questions. But if you could just bear with us over the next 45 minutes and give the presenters an opportunity to present what they have to present, we will answer those questions. And so that's all I ask.
Yes, please. So we have one quick question. I thought all these presentations, you already present this on the last meeting, right? This meeting is for us to talk about either we go through MUD or HOA, right? Why do we go through all this, presentation that you have done again? So you're going to take a lot of time from here.
So the reason we're doing this is at the last meeting, there's only 95 people here, and some of them were representatives of the MUD, some of them were not. This is a presentation, there's, I don't know, double, triple the number of people here tonight, and so we want to make sure everyone has a chance to hear directly from the structural engineer and directly from the landscape architect and directly from the attorneys to ensure that what we are putting together and what we're presenting to you is the complete information. We want to make sure everyone has the complete information. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to the structural engineer to go through kind of his assessment of the fencing in the area.
Then you should have at the beginning with only 90 residents. You should have with all your proposal, with the video, and everybody come here.
And we have all the report with us. We know what it is going on.
Last presentation. I like to hear it. Sit down.
Yeah, I want to let's take trouble.
Let's go. Here.
Again, everyone is at a different level of understanding around the issue. And so the reason we're making the presentation is to balance that understanding. When I go to social media and I see on social media the comments that was made on social media about where is the fencing going, and people not understanding that this isn't putting in new fencing. When I go on social media, people making comments that were being made, it's clear to me, and it was clear to the board, that there was not, I repeat, there was not a high level of understanding around the issue. And so yes, we're here tonight to listen to your concerns, we're here tonight to listen to your comments. But at the same time, there are others in this group that needs to hear what the issues are. And again, I ask you to bear with the process. I ask you not to yell and scream and holler at each other. I ask you to be civil. I ask you to be responsible. I ask you to be accountable to each other, to the presenters, and to the community. I don't want to be long-winded. The presenters don't want to be long-winded. We know you're here, we know you have to go to work tomorrow. And so if you let the presenters get through the presentation, then we can get to your issues and your concerns and your comments and your questions.
Sir, quick question. In terms of housekeeping, is anybody taking notes or anything on those lines or minutes from tonight's meeting?
Yes,
You're
yes.
going to be recording for everybody?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? My name's Mike Hulbert. I'm a structural engineer with BGA Engineers. And we were hired to assess the primarily the brick thin wall fencing in the neighborhood. The fencings were built since 2006, all the way up to around 2013. And there are a number of different designs of thin wall fencing out there. Since there are 72 development sections, what we call development sections, and so each section tends to have its own design. And so we evaluated the fencing section by section and lumped each section into one priority number. So even though a section might say priority 1, not 100% of it may be priority 1. So just kind of pointing that out. We found a number of different types of deteriorations, and some of those can be attributed to the original construction, the design, the water penetration into the fencing, some of the landscaping that's been built up over time. So there's a number of factors that have affected the condition of the brick fencing. So what I'll touch upon, well, actually, can you go back real quick? Just to, one slide, please. So sorry to give the engineering lesson here. The brick thin wall consists of three primary parts. The foundations, drilled piers, straight shaft drilled piers that are spaced about 15 feet apart. On top of them is a brick column or pilaster, and then between the pilasters is a single width of brick that spans from pilaster to pilaster. There is supposed to be a gap underneath the bottom of the brick panels. Sorry if we use a lot of different terms for these parts. There's no real define. And so there's three primary parts, and the main part in y'all's fencing that's deteriorating are the panels. We really didn't see too much foundation issues, a few pilaster issues, but primarily the panels between the pilasters. So now, next slide, please. So the most common and structurally deficient issue with the fencing is, again, this is a reinforced brick system. It's not the same as your brick on your houses, where the brick on your houses sit on a concrete foundation, sit there. They have a structural wood framing behind them that act as the structure to resist the wind loads. These fences have to resist the weight of the panels that are free floating between the pilasters and the wind loads and the gravity loads on those panels. So there is reinforcing steel throughout the fencing that handles the forces. So the most common type of problem we saw in y'all's fencing is deterioration of that horizontal joint reinforcing. And so, slide, I know y'all probably can't see this, but we stay back on the first one. Yeah. So,
This one?
one more. So these are probably, the top two pictures are the absolute worst conditions that we found, where once water infiltrates the mortar joints, starts attacking the joint reinforcing, it'll start corroding, it'll pop the mortar a little bit, and then slowly but surely corrode and can expand, and you can lose the bottom course of your brick. So those two top pictures are the most common problems that we saw out here, and those, depending on how many panels were affected, is how we designated priority 1s versus 2s. Some of the other types of problems are vines growing over the fencing, And while it might look really nice, you really don't want to hold moisture against a brick that has reinforcing inside of it, because that'll just accelerate the corrosion and you have no idea what it looks like underneath. So that's an issue. Then there's a few places where the dirt is too high and water is ponding up underneath, and brick absorbs moisture just like a sponge and has to stay as dry as possible, otherwise your brick reinforcing inside just starts to corrode. So that leads to another very common problem. Y'all have a lot of planting out in the reserve areas, very nice beds, but the beds, the mulch has been put against the brick fencing 6, 12, 18 inches against it with an irrigation system. So that just adds moisture on the brick that affects its longevity. So that picture there shows just a bed that's built up. Then there's another issue that's not that common, but you have some maturing trees. Now that the neighborhood's approaching, 20 years, you're getting some maturing trees. And if you have isolated trees that don't have an adequate irrigation system, your homeowner, you're gonna water your yard, the trees' roots aren't gonna know the boundaries. They're gonna grow up underneath the fencing and eventually once the roots become mature enough, they'll push the fencing out. So we saw that in just a couple of locations. The bottom left picture, that's one of the worst conditions, where a tree root grew up underneath a panel, lifted the panel up, and broke the top of the pilaster off. And then you have your lawnmowers mowing the reserves, and every once in a while they'll catch the corner of a pilaster and so cause some damage. So those are the most common problems that we saw with the brick thin wall fencing. And then you've got a lot of steel fencing as well. And that's a system that's very thin metal that can easily corrode. The screws that are used to connect them, water gets inside, corrodes from the inside. And so you have several sections that are deteriorating pretty significantly. And then you have some other sort of a hybrid situations where you have some brick fencing up underneath with some steel fencing on top. And because of the condition of the steel fencing, that's deteriorating pretty badly as well. So again, like I said, we walked all the fencing, assigned priority to each of the sections, went over our findings with the MUDs, and after discussing the options of how soon would we recommend that you replace the 1s, 2s, etc., we came to the agreement that the recommendation was to go ahead and replace all the priority 1s and priority 2 fencing at the same time. And then, at the same time, start a maintenance program to go and continually evaluate the priority 3s and 4s, identify easy items that can be undertaken to increase the longevity, the lifespan of the remaining fences. Because the priority 4s, we haven't seen any issues with the priority 4 fencing. But it's just like our health, if we don't take care of our health, we'll get sick sooner. So we want to extend the life of the priority 4s. And then the priority 3s only have minor little issues that can be addressed. So I know you probably can't see this, but the blue areas are the development sections that are the priority 1s, and the red are the priority 2. And again, we assigned an entire development section, and as was discussed before, we didn't recommend you replace a panel here or a panel there because the designs on all 72 sections are very different. There's some uniformity between the oldest areas. But the recommendation was section by what we call development section by section. So that's just sort of gives you an idea of where the priority 1 and priority 2s are located. And it's our recommendation to go back and replace the brick thin wall fencing with a newly designed brick thin wall fence. This system's been around for over 30 years, and when it's properly designed, properly constructed, and properly maintained, will have a very long lifespan.
How long? What's your design like?
5 years? It's 25 to 30 years. Again, the system's only been around for 30 years. There are thin walls that are still standing that were constructed and built 30 years ago. It's not a wood fence where, okay, you can kind of leave it up until it's completely fallen down. So the system does work if, again, it needs to be designed for the proper wind speed, the proper soil conditions, etc. And so there are obviously some things that will design more quality into it this time than what you currently have. So I'll pass it back to Sean.
So when it comes to steel fencing, the proposed alternative that we have is aluminum fencing. Aluminum fencing still has that same high-end look, but it's a lot stronger, it's a lot more durable, and it's a lot cheaper, actually. So with a factory powder coat on it, factory fasteners for the structural integrity, and also just the material itself, aluminum, you'll get no rusting. Aluminum does not rust. Iron and steel fence do. So that's just one of the ways that we want to tackle that issue of all the steel fencing in your area. And then also, we were asked to develop a maintenance procedure just to promote longevity for the existing fence right now, whether it's priority 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then also, once priority 1 and 2 fences are installed, this is for mainly for brick thin wall, but this could apply to all of them. So we created a list of just maintenance procedures. We're not saying all these factors, or one factor is better than the other, or one factor creates more damage. These are just the things that we saw out in the field, and things that do account for all this premature deterioration that we're seeing. So the first issue up here is to maintain a minimum of 2 inches of clear space to be in the finished grade, which is the ground, the mulch, the soil, and the bottom of the fence, the final coursing of it. These fences are designed to have this gap so airflow can get underneath, so water can flow underneath, so the brick doesn't soak up all this moisture. We noticed as we walked around the district that just a lot of maintenance errors were made where mulch was being stacked up, soil was being stacked up, etc. And this is a recommended frequency of yearly, so having a maintenance contractor go out there and just making sure that all the dirt, all the soil isn't piled up against the fence in some critical areas. Number 2 is to prevent and remove vegetation that's on the fences. We saw a lot of sections that have ivy and other plants growing on the brick thin wall. This creates a maintenance nightmare because a lot of moisture just gets whipped into the brick and it prevents this premature deterioration. So we also recommend something like that happen yearly. Number 3 is monitor the growth of large, mature trees in close proximity to the thin wall. As Mike said, we saw many instances where root growth going up underneath the panels pops the panels out of place, which breaks the columns and just causes, the issues that we pointed out in the pictures. So for this, we just want to have an assessment of what trees are too close, if we need to prune them, if we need to root prune them, or if we need to add irrigation on the outside of the fences so the trees get enough water so that the root system doesn't have to go underneath the fence into people's backyards that are often maintained a little bit better than the ones in the reserves. Next is to just inspect all the finished grade, like I said, around the fences. Make sure there's no low spots where water can gather, and then make sure there's no soil piled up. And then also, this is a little bit more of a, not a yearly frequency, but every 2 to 3 to 4 years, is just having somebody walk around and looking at the fences, seeing what shape they're in, if there's cracking. If you can catch it earlier, then it's easier to repair. We've just noticed that there's most fencing that's just beyond repair, and that's why we have to recommend tearing down the whole panel, where you can come in and you can catch things earlier. And then 6 up here is just cleaning and washing the fence in certain areas. It just helps. But there's not a lot of gunk build up, and it makes everything look better. 7 is inspecting the irrigation. We did a lot of our walks early in the morning because we did it in the middle of the summer. And we noticed a lot of the irrigation heads were being sprayed directly onto the walls. And yes, these walls can take rainwater, but when they're constantly soaked by getting water twice, 3 times a day, then that moisture is just going to stick around all day, and it's going to weep into the bricks and whatnot and cause all this damage that we've shown you. And then finally is just homeowner education, is just providing this list to you on your side of the fence. If you have plants growing on, if you have soil piled up, if you have trees that you think are too close, it's just doing your own preventative maintenance so this issue doesn't arise in the future. And I'm going to pass it back to Sanjay.
Just so that you know, on this maintenance program, as far as ivory on fences, we've already started that process. We removed ivory on a lot of the fences on the major thoroughfare, and we're continuing to do that. As far as the cutback, when these recommendations were made during the heat of the summer, we couldn't make those cutbacks, but during the fall and winter time, we have instructed the landscape individuals, landscape company. We're going to start the program around cutting back so that we can have that air space between the vegetation and the fences. And so we're not sitting here waiting. We're proactively, as we learn, we're implementing things to prolong the life and the longevity of the fence.
All right, good evening. I want to reiterate the thoughts that we're really glad everyone is here to hear and get your questions answered. I'm Steve Robinson with Allen Boone Humphreys Robinson. I represent Cinco Southwest 1, and when we were approached, this is, as Chester said, an HOA problem. We have agreed that if the community and the HOA decides that it is a better option to fund this through the district, we are willing to be of assistance and to be part of the solution. But this needs to be your decision, your solution, and so we are glad that everyone is here to try to get your questions answered, because this is a big problem, as has been identified. We've estimated that the total cost of priority 1 and 2 fencing is about $11.2 million now, $11.5 million. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands that gets all of the existing iron fencing replaced, and it includes the wood fencing, but it also includes the priority 1 and priority 2 brick fencing that has been evaluated and determined to be failing, that would be turned over to the district. And I just want to talk a little bit about that issue. Is, the district is here to repair and replace and build facilities that they own. And so if these facilities are going to be done by the district, financed by the district, they would have to become part of the district property in order for them to be financed and maintained by the district. So we would be taking over that fencing. We've studied 2 primary options. We had to pick, basically, and obviously there are lots of variations that could be done, but we basically picked, what if the districts funded it completely, Or what if the HOA funded it? Obviously, the HOA is funded through assessments, and the districts are funded through your property taxes. So there is a difference in the way in which they are funded. The HOA, next slide, has not budgeted for this level. And in fact, HOAs generally are not large capital entities. They are not designed for doing projects of this magnitude because they're funded on an annual basis from annual payments by the residents. They are not generally in the business of financing large capital projects over long periods of time. HOAs can only borrow on a shorter term basis generally through commercial lending. Their interest rates that they borrow at are generally significantly higher. Their borrowing is at taxable rates. The district's borrowings are at tax exempt rates, so we borrow less expensively over longer periods of time. We have estimated that if all of the Cinco Southwest HOA were to pay for this, it would phase 1 and 2 would require about a $600 increase in the annual HOA assessment. You are part of Cinco Southwest and Cinco Northwest together, and they have to have uniform fees. Obviously, this is just related to phase 1 and phase 2. If the districts were to fund these, MUD districts are in the business of building infrastructure. So we build the water plants, the sewer plants, the parks, the big drainage ditches, your big detention pond lake out here, and we finance those with bonds and pay those off generally over about 25-year periods. We do have a unique structure here where all of the districts participate on a pro rata basis in paying for facilities. Cinco MUD number 1 is the master district and is the operator of your regional plants and your big ditches and your big detention ponds and your parks. And each of the individual districts pays on an annual basis a pro rata share of that debt service through your property taxes. If you go to the next slide, those are the breakdown of the district boundaries. We'll flip to the next. So if you look at funding through bonds, we're able to spread this cost over a much longer period. Instead of a commercial lending period, if you had to borrow the funding, which may be 5 to 7 years, we're going to be able to spread it out over a 25-year period. What that means to you as a resident is if you live here for the next 3 to 5 years and you pay for all the expenses and then you move, you've paid for the fences that are projected to have a 25-year useful life. If we sell 25-year bonds, everybody in the year will pay for basically 1/25 of the cost during the time in which they live here. And so you are building very long-term capital assets and either paying for them over a short term with your HOA increased assessments or a longer time with bonds. With bonds, as with your borrowing, we will have to pay interest. We do borrow at very low interest cost, as I mentioned. The districts do have some cash reserves that could be utilized to reduce these costs. And I will mention that from funding that we receive through a strategic partnership agreement, which we won't go into that, through the City of Houston rebate of sales taxes, the master district has agreed to fund about $2.5 million of these initial projects out of current cash reserves to fund primarily those wood fences and that would would not have a 25-year useful life. So we're actually going to fund long-term if we do it. Again, we're only going to take over these projects and fund them if the community decides that this is what the community wants to do. So going to the scenario, this is looking at the low, average, and high home values in each of the district, a projected increase in the tax rate, which is 2 or 3 cents on the average home value, and then a projected increase in the tax bill that you would incur on an annual basis if bonds are sold. So if you compare the two, basically the HOA would have to have a significantly higher cost initially, but a shorter time frame. The MUD would have a lower out-of-pocket cost, and that this number is based upon funding all of this, phase 1 and phase 2, without the cash reserves. So that number could certainly come down. This is an average number. You saw in the prior slides, depending on your home value, it could be higher or it could be lower. Debt service for HOA is on short term at higher interest rates. MUD is over at lower interest rates over a longer period. In the HOA, the residential property is in your HOA. The commercial property is in a separate commercial HOA. So if the HOA pays for it, it will only be paid for by the HOA, the residents in the HOA, not the commercial properties. In the MUDs, both the residential and the commercial properties are within the MUDs, and so everyone pays the same tax. Taxes have to be within each district, the same for everyone. And then there are just some difference. Generally, the HOA is more of a maintenance entity and a landscaping entity. The MUDs are much more of a long-term infrastructure entity. They have engineers, consultants, operators that are in the business of owning and maintaining long-term capital assets. So there are some differences. When we do, and I want to point out, these are all projections. If these are not all based on bid, received bids. If the MUD does these projects at your request and funds them, we would have to go out for competitive bids for those projects. They could not be done any other way. State law requires that they be competitively bid. So as we looked at this, understanding the useful life of these projects and understanding the differences in the length of the borrowing time, it was our opinion that with the Cinco MUD 1 board, with the concurrence of the other districts, that it is better to spread this cost out over a long-term period to lessen the immediate impact. We do have lots of turnover we have lots of energy corridor residents, people that move. If you pay for it all in a very short time frame, you're paying for something that's going to be a benefit 25 years out. That may be what you want to do. But I want to go back to it needs to be the HOA coming to the MUD 1 board and the other district boards and saying, this is our preference. We do not have the ability to go through and do this without your request. And so we are here. We do think we have a better financing capability and better project management and better systems in place to do that, just because of the nature of our districts and the consultants we have. But if this is a preference to remain with the HOA, that is certainly the decision that we will wait for. With that, we do have opportunities for input beyond this meeting, with both through the Cinco HOA and through the MUD board meetings. But again, the MUD boards are waiting for really the HOA's decision. We are ready and willing to assist. We are an accommodator because in the end, you all will pay for this. The costs are the same. I mean, there are no free lunches in this. And so there's not a difference here for the cost of building the fence. But one can be spread out, one can't. Y'all need to decide which of those preferences, what is your preference. With that, I will turn it back over to...
Yeah. Take over the fences. If the MUD district takes over the fences, will y'all be responsible for the maintenance of it so we don't end up the same spot we're in?
Yes, that is the reason why we put in place this maintenance. We said, guys, we don't want to ever be here again. How do we do that? Let's put in place a maintenance protocol that gives these the greatest chance of not being here again. So that's why we designed the maintenance protocol. We also budgeted that maintenance protocol. And we have looked at also both the design changes and the construction management, meaning oversight during construction, to give this both the longest likelihood of being built right this time and being maintained correctly. So yes, as an accommodation, what we have said is we are willing to step in and take this as one of your huge future liabilities as an HOA if everyone, or if majority of the HOA believes that this is a better way to do this in the future.